This is transitional words in sequence. Lesson number 2, sentence starters and sequences, part 3 of 3. Again, this is transitional words in sequence, lesson number 2, sentence starters and sequences, part 3 of 3. All PowerPoints can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. All PowerPoints are available at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Transitional words in sequence, lesson number 2, sentence starters and sequences, part 3 of 3. This is the final part of lesson number 2, sentence starters and sequences. The objective today is to create your own sequence for the transitional words and sequence word categories. So you're going to create your own sequence for the word categories. You will need sentence starters number 2. That's the handout you'll need, sentence starters number 2. The handout can be found at magichatwritinginstruction.com. Please go to magichatwritinginstruction.com and print out handout number 2, sentence starters number 2. So go to magichatwritinginstruction.com. Again, magichatwritinginstruction.com. Find transitional words and sequence lesson number 2 and the handout transitional words and sequence sentence starters number 2. This handout should be on your desk right now. You will need this handout to complete the remaining presentation. Again, as we always do when we model something for the first time, we select a very easy prompt. So today's prompt is going to be, what is your favorite thing to do? In order to complete this prompt, you're going to have to choose categories from sentence starters number 2, and you're going to create your own original sequence. I'm going to walk you through the process of creating your own original sequence. When composing your own original sequence, there's a few general principles that you should think about. Now, when you first start and you use your first category, you don't have to use a generalizing category. Okay? You could use an emphasis category. You might be able to use a sequence category. But what you definitely have to do is you definitely have to make sure that that first sentence is a general, inclusive response. You do not want to start with an illustration category. You do not want to go right into a specific detail or example. So make sure that whatever category you use for that first sentence is general and broad. Similarly, in the second sentence, you don't want to go broad. You want to go narrow. You want to make sure that the second sentence is a specific detail or example that relates to your first sentence. So now in your second sentence, you probably don't want to go with the generalizing word or an emphasis word. In your second sentence, your example sentence, you want to use something from the illustration category. Maybe even a sequence might work here in this second sentence. But make sure you provide a specific detail or example that supports your first sentence. Now, with another principle here is that when you introduce more information, either the initial information, the evidence sentence, or more information in the additional sentence, you want to make sure that your information always gels, that is, does not contradict your topic sentence. So you want to make sure every time you bring in new information to your paragraph that it's going to agree with your topic sentence. So I'm going to go through the categories on sentence starters number 2 handout, and I'm going to show you, as I give you my model response, what categories work for the different sentences. Now for sentence number 1, you've got 4 categories on your handout that almost all the word phrases from these categories work. You've got the summary category, generalization category, sequence category, emphasis category. So look to one of these 4 categories, pick a word phrase, and start your first sentence. I'm going to go ahead and choose all things considered, and I'm going to start my first sentence in response to the question, what's your favorite thing to do? So I chose all things considered, and I'm going to talk to you guys about eating steak, which I actually don't do too much of anymore, but all things considered, eating steak is my favorite thing to do. Now for sentence number 2, there's a lot of different directions that I can go in, but I've isolated 4 categories from your handout that I think work: consequence, restatement, sequence, and illustration. So you need to figure out which category you want to move to in sentence number 2. Choose a word phrase from that category, and let's write our second sentence. So I went with therefore. So all things considered, eating steak is my favorite thing to do. Therefore, I try to eat as much steak as possible. Now for sentence number 3, again, a lot of different directions you can go in. I've identified 6 different categories: contrast, similarity, consequence, restatement, sequence, and illustration. Any one of these 6 will work. You just got to choose a word or phrase from one of these categories that will make sense with what you've already written. So I actually selected a word phrase from the contrast category, and now this allows me to really go in a slightly different direction. So it's not totally streamlined with my first sentence, but it does allow me to support the first sentence in such a way so that it allows for a more nuanced response. What do I mean by that? Well, I said in the second sentence I try to eat as much steak as possible. But the reality is steak's not that healthy. You can't eat it all the time, at least not at my age. So I wrote, however, too much steak is not good for my health. So I want to go on and offer a little more nuanced, detailed response here. So I use a contrast word to explain to the reader that I can't eat it all the time because it's not good for my health. So the contrast word points me in a slightly different direction and almost undermines the previous sentence and allows me to explain it a little more deeply. So here I've selected 6 categories for sentence number 4: contrast, similarity, consequence, restatement, sequence, and illustration. The category that you decide to use will depend, of course, on the categories you've already decided to use in sentences 1 through 3 and the word phrases you've used for sentences 1 through 3. Obviously, what you decide to use here will really depend on what you've written so far. So you can see that I went with a consequence category with as a result, and I like this because it really allows me to continue with the contrasting idea. So my contrasting idea was however, too much steak is not good for my health. So I can continue with that thought, and I write, as a result, I don't eat steak as much as I would like. So it really allows me again to round out the question and really explain it in a little bit more detail. Now, for the 5th category, the 5th sentence, it's interesting to note that these are also the same categories you can start with. These are my 4 topic sentence categories, but they can also be used for your concluding or summarizing sentence. We've got summary, generalization, sequence, emphasis. Go ahead and select a word phrase from one of these 4 categories. And so I selected indeed, and I tried to again end it with something that will sort of reiterate my point, drive it home. Indeed, life is not fair. Well, this makes sense because with the however phrase, I sort of turned the corner a little bit, went with too much steak is not good for my health. As a result, I can't eat as much as I would like. But because the topic here is eating steak is my favorite thing to do, it makes sense now for me to say, indeed, life is not fair. Why isn't life fair? Well, because steak is not really good for you and I can't eat it all the time. So you see how the transitional word phrases don't have to proceed in such a linear direction all the time. I can twist and turn them a little bit and make them work for me. And I hope you're seeing that and you're making them work for you. Okay, so in order to really internalize the logic of the word phrases, I'm going to ask that you answer a few more writing prompts using your own sequences. Now, for each writing prompt, I'm going to ask that you use new order of categories. So, for example, on the first writing prompt, you might use a summary category. On the next writing prompt, you might start off with an emphasis category. As long as you keep changing up the categories for each response, you're doing the right thing, and you're starting to see how these words can be used in so many different ways. So here are our controversy rights. 6. Does Facebook help or hurt friendships? 7. Should 13-year-olds be able to see R-rated movies? 8. Are certain kinds of music inappropriate for all people of all ages? 9. Is money the root of all evil or necessary for freedom? Which one? Is money the root of all evil or necessary for freedom? Or both? Number 10. Does technology help you feel connected or more alone? Does technology help you feel connected or more alone? So before sending you off on your own, I'm just going to show you a couple different possible sequences. So this is question number 6. Does Facebook help or hurt friendships? In this sequence, we're going to start off with summary, then consequence, restatement, addition, generalization. I'm going to ask that you, before you even put pen to paper, take out your handout, look at your summary words, and figure out how you're going to go about responding to this question. Then use a word phrase from your consequence category, restatement category, addition, etc. In your head, before putting pen to paper, figure out how you can approach this question using these 5 categories in this way. Let's do the same thing again for controversy right number 7. Should 13-year-olds be able to see R-rated movies? Here, notice that I've got a new sequence, because that's your instructions, to come up with a new sequence of categories for each response. Now I'm going emphasis, illustration, similarity, sequence, summary. So look to your emphasis words, choose a word phrase, and let's start answering this question in your mind without even putting pen to paper. Then go to illustration, choose a word phrase, similarity, sequence, summary. Try to give yourself an approach and answer to the question before putting pen to paper. Okay, so you've got an idea now of how to think through these prompts using transitional words and sequence and new sequences. You understand that before you can proceed to transitional words and sequence with textual evidence, which is our next lesson, before we can get to textual evidence, you really have to be familiar with all of the word phrases and using them in new and different ways. So in order to do that, I'm going to ask again that you complete these controversy rights. For each controversy right, use a new sequence of word phrases. So make sure you're mixing, matching, reorganizing your categories so that for each response you've got a new order of categories so that you can really begin to internalize all of those prompts and all the various ways they can be used.